You didn't go out tonight looking for a story. You were just trying to get home, to make it through the evening without anything extraordinary happening. You didn't dress to be noticed. You didn't smile to be remembered. But sometimes the night has other plans. Sometimes all it takes is a question, a small one, simple and unassuming. Like someone asking you for the time dot, and from that single question, something opens out, something quiet, something soft. This is not a story of falling in love. Not exactly. It's a story about what happens in the spaces between. The glance held a second too long. The street that stretched out like an invitation. The hand that never reached, but somehow still touched something deep inside you. Tonight, you'll walk beside a stranger who doesn't try to change your life. He just walks at your pace, listens without interrupting, looks at you like you're already enough dot, so rest your thoughts. Let the city fade behind you and follow the sound of footsteps on a quiet street. He only asked for the time, but what you gave him without meaning to was everything you were finally ready to share. Asterisk, you weren't in a rush. You were just walking. Nowhere important to be. Nowhere urgent to return to. Just letting the evening carry you, city lights humming overhead. The air holding on to a bit of leftover warmth, like the last sigh of summer before the chill sets in. It was that hour when everything feels a little softer than usual. The sky, half dark, the streets half full, a little hour. The kind that feels like a held breath. That's when you heard him. "Excuse me," he said, voice low but clear. You turned instinctively, politely, the way we all do in a stranger's tone. Carries no threat, just curiosity. He was standing just off the curb, not too close, not too far. One hand in his pocket, the other lifting slightly in a gesture that felt more hesitant than rehearsed. His face wasn't lit dramatically, but his eyes caught the glow of a passing. Karn held it for a second longer than they should have. "What time is it?" You didn't expect to answer with anything more than numbers. Just digits. You looked at your phone, told him. That should have been the end of it, but he didn't thank you and walk away immediately. He stood there, smiling, not overly, not flirtatiously, just enough that it lingered. Like he was waiting for something else to happen, or maybe hoping it already had. "Thanks," he said and paused. "Feels like it's later than it is, doesn't it?" You nodded before you could stop yourself, because it did. Because somehow, the moment he said it, you realized you had been thinking the same thing. That it felt like the world had already begun to quiet, like time had slowed down just enough to stretch. He chuckled lightly. Or maybe I've just been in my head too long today. It was such an ordinary thing to say. But the way he said it, half to himself, half to you, felt like an invitation, not one that needed acceptance. Just one that asked for honesty. You shifted your weight, but didn't leave. Something about him made standing there feel okay. Easy, even. Like this moment didn't need to be more than what it was to matter. "I know what you mean," you said, and surprised yourself a little. You hadn't planned on speaking more than the time. But your voice came out level, curious, open. He looked at you again, really looked. Not in a way that scanned or searched, but in a way that rested. Like his gaze could pause in the space between words and find something worthwhile there. You walk often at this hour? You smiled. Not always. But sometimes the quiet's easier to hear when the world's already started turning down the volume. He nodded like he understood, like you just said something he'd once thought and forgotten. Yeah, he said softly. Yeah, exactly. You both stood there like that for a moment, not moving, not in a hurry to step back into the stream of the night. His presence didn't feel like pressure, it felt like pause. Like that tiny breath the universe takes before something shifts, so subtle most people miss it. And then casually he said, Mind if I walk with you a bit? It wasn't a line. It wasn't wrapped in charm or coded in expectation. It was just a question. Like the first one, simple, soft, waiting. You glanced down the sidewalk. The path ahead felt open, not just literally, but inside your chest. There was space for this, for him. For now, you nodded once. He fell into step beside you, not too close. Respectful, easy. His hands stayed in his pockets as if to prove he wasn't in a rush to fill the air with anything but company. And so you walked, side by side. Just like that dot, he didn't pepper you with questions. He didn't flood the space with anecdotes. Instead, you talked in turns, small exchanges, gentle curiosities. What had your day been like? Whether the city ever felt like home. How weird it was that some nights seemed to hold more weight than others, for no clear reason at all, Dot, and all the while, your feet kept moving and your heart stayed quiet. Not empty, not nervous, just quiet. A kind of stillness that felt earned. Weren't thinking about where this was going. You weren't thinking about what came next. You were just aware of your body beside another peaceful, undemanding, unhurried. You realized you liked his voice, not for how it sounded, but for how. It made you feel, Dot. It made you want to keep answering his questions. It made you want to ask your own, not for information, but for connection. And maybe that's how all stories worth telling begin. Not with something loud, not with sparks, but with someone asking gently, what time is it? Asterisk, you told yourself it was just a few steps. Just a short stretch of street you didn't mind sharing. The kind of thing that didn't need to mean anything. After all, you'd walked with strangers before, tourists asking for directions, co-workers you ran into outside the office, people who moved in and out of your orbit in the polite choreography of city life. But this wasn't quite like that, because even after the corner came and passed, the one you usually turn at, the one that leads to your block, you didn't gesture goodbye. You didn't say, well, this is me. You didn't even slow down. Your feet just kept moving. And so did his, Dot. It was subtle how your pace matched. Not in lockstep, not awkward, but naturally like two songs finding the same rhythm without trying. The space between you felt intentional, but not forced. His hands remained tucked in his jacket pockets. He walked slightly ahead at times, then beside you again, as if respecting whatever shape the moment wanted to take. The street stretched quiet in front of you. A row of shuttered cafes, closed storefronts with dim neon signs, puddles that reflected. The amber wash of streetlights overhead. You passed a cat perched on a stoop, a couple arguing softly in a doorway, a cyclist gliding silently by like a whisper. The city around you moved, but slowly, as if honoring the stillness you and he had slipped into. You didn't know what to say next, Dot, and for once, that didn't feel like a problem. He filled the silence occasionally with thoughts, not the kind that felt like declarations, but the gentle drift of someone thinking out loud in safe company about how night feels different when you're not trying to get anywhere, about how cities hum quieter when they think you're not listening. You answered in turn, not always with words, sometimes just with a nod or a sideways glance or a quiet smile he caught but didn't name. What surprised you most wasn't how easy it was to walk beside him. It was how natural it felt to stay, because usually you're cautious. Usually you're measuring. Usually your mind moves a few exits ahead, calculating how to leave gracefully, how to protect the softest parts of yourself from being seen too soon. But tonight, you didn't feel that pull. Instead, you felt something gentler, something still, like being in a bookstore and realizing you've stopped looking for a title and started simply enjoying the feel of the spine in your hands. He asked you questions, not invasive ones, not the kind that scrape at old wounds, just curious ones. Do you always walk without a destination? Have you ever found something in the street you kept? What's your favorite kind of silence? You laughed softly at that last one. The kind where I forget I'm being quiet, you said. And he smiled like you'd given him something precious. He didn't rush to respond. He let your words settle. You found yourself noticing things you hadn't noticed in a while. The shape of the clouds above rooftops, the sound of your own shoes on wet pavement, the warmth in your chest that hadn't been there. When you left the house earlier, Dot, it wasn't attraction in the way you'd always been told it should feel. It wasn't dizzying. It wasn't electric. It was calm, steady, like a door slowly creaking open in a room you forgot existed. And inside light, you realized you weren't thinking about how this would end. You weren't wondering if he'd ask for your number or if he was single or what the rules were here. You were simply walking beside someone who didn't demand anything from you but presence. And maybe that was the strangest part of all, how much comfort you found in that. How your body relaxed next to his. How your thoughts slowed like leaves drifting down a river. Instead of trying to swim upstream, Dot, there was a moment as you passed under a blinking lamppost where his shoulder brushed yours. Just for a second, and neither of you moved away. You didn't speak about it. You didn't have to, Dot. It felt like something had been agreed upon quietly. You were here, Dot, together, Dot, not by accident, not by arrangement, just because, Dot. And so when the next corner came and he glanced at you like he was checking, making sure this wasn't too much, making sure he hadn't overstayed, you only had to tilt your head barely for him to understand. You wanted to keep walking, even if you didn't know why. Even if part of you suspected this night would fold itself back into your life by morning, like a dream you'd half remember, but fully feel, because right now, something inside you had already softened, Dot, and sometimes that's reason enough. Asterisk it. Should have been harder to talk. You were, after all, still strangers. Two people who hadn't known each other a few city blocks ago. Two names not yet exchanged. But somehow, your voices found each other like they were catching up, not starting fresh. He asked questions gently, never rushed, never sharp. He left room between his words, and even more between yours. The kind of space that lets thoughts breathe. The kind that doesn't make you feel like you need to hurry toward meaning. You didn't even notice how long you've been speaking until the fourth or fifth question tumbled out, and you realized you weren't filtering your answers. You weren't scripting yourself like you sometimes do with new people measuring reactions. Trimming your thoughts, giving the polished version of your truth. No, tonight it came out as it was, whole, unshaped, and he listened not with nods, or hitchless, but with his posture, his quiet, the way his eyes never flicked to his phone or the sidewalk or the passing people. He listened like your words were music he hadn't heard in a while and didn't want to miss. You told him small things, that you preferred early evenings to late nights, that sometimes you leave voice notes to yourself just to hear something spoken aloud, that your favorite sound in the world is wind moving through trees. When you can't see the trees, just hear them. He didn't laugh at your weirdness. He leaned into it like he was waiting for more Dot, and when he spoke, it felt like rain falling, gently into still water, no disruption, just ripples that reached toward yours. He told you he once got lost in a foreign city without panic and ended up finding the best meal of his life, that he collects phrases from strangers like their souvenirs, that sometimes he says goodnight to the moon when no one's around. You smiled when he said that, and he caught it. I know, he laughed softly. It's ridiculous. No, you replied. It's lovely. And you meant it, because he was. You couldn't explain why everything felt so known. His presence didn't remind you of someone else. It didn't fill an old space or mimic a past voice. It was new. And still, it felt like something your nervous system already understood. Like maybe, in some other lifetime, you'd shared a long car ride through unfamiliar mountains, or passed each other in the middle of a war and exchanged names under the sound of cannon fire. Or maybe you both sat silently by the same river once, eons ago, and watched the sun climb over the trees. Whatever it was, it didn't need naming. You felt it in the way your body relaxed when he turned to speak Dot in the preparation. Way your words tumbled out without apology Dot, and the way your laugh returned, not loud, but full, like a bird finding its wings again. He noticed. Not in the way some people do, pointing it out, turning it into something to admire. He noticed like a note being struck in harmony. It's nice hearing you laugh, he said Dot, and that was all. Not you should smile more. Not I like that sound. Just a simple observation shared and left to float between you like breath in the cold. You rounded another corner. This time you noticed the shift. You'd gone far from where you'd meant to walk, but you didn't care. You didn't feel lost. You felt found Dot, not by him, but by the version of yourself he seemed to coax forward, the one who didn't over-explain, didn't edit, didn't shrink, the you who spoke in complete sentences and let the silence between them glow. You passed a bakery closed for the night, the scent of flour and sugar still faint in the air. A few fallen leaves danced across the sidewalk. The city around you had fallen into a hush, the way a room does when someone begins to sing a lullaby. I don't usually do this, you admitted aloud. Surprising yourself? What? Walk with strangers? You nodded. or talk like this. I'm usually quieter. He was quiet for a moment before replying. I think you still are, he said, but not in the way most people mean it. That stopped you for a breath. Some people are quiet because they're hiding, others because they're watching. You feel quiet like someone who's listening. You didn't answer right away because no one had ever said it quite like that. And something about the way he said it made your chest feel warmer than it should have. Not romantic. Not yet, just real. You looked over at him as you walked. The shape of his jaw, the calm in his eyes, the way he carried himself, not puffed up, not performative. Just someone who knew how to be still around another person, and as strange as it was, as unlikely as fleeting, it was working. You were walking through the city with a stranger, and it didn't feel like danger. It didn't feel like foolishness. It felt like ease. It felt like the kind of conversation that isn't about gathering facts, but building a bridge, one word at a time, one look, one shared silence, until you find yourself standing on the other side of something and wondering how you crossed it without noticing. You had no idea where this night would lead, that somehow that wasn't frightening, because some people enter your life not to stay, not to fix, not to fill a gap, but to show you what's still alive inside you. And as his voice moved alongside your thoughts, as your sentences became laughter and his eyes kept meeting yours without asking for anything in return, you realized you weren't just talking. You were remembering what it felt like to be heard. And that, in itself, was enough. Asterisk, you weren't sure when the air between you changed. It didn't shift dramatically. There was no sudden spark, no cinematic swell. But there was something new now, something you could feel without naming. A softness, a hum, the kind of presence that doesn't push or ask, but simply sits near your skin, close enough to feel, far enough not to crowd. He looked at you, not constantly, not searching, but when he did, it lingered. And it wasn't a look that pulled. It was a look that waited, that rested, that knew better than to rush what was still unfolding. You said something small, something half-thought, more feeling than fact. Something about how you'd always wondered whether anyone else remembered their dreams in grayscale, or if it was just your mind dulling the edges of old fears. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd usually say aloud. It wasn't even meant to land, but it did. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask why. He didn't redirect. He just smiled. And that smile, it didn't rise quickly. It wasn't wide. It was slow, almost imperceptible. A smile born of recognition, not reaction. A smile that seemed to say, I know. I've been there. Or somewhere near enough to understand. You felt your throat tighten, not with emotion, not with embarrassment, but with that strange pressure that comes when you realize you've been understood before you've even finished speaking. No one had ever smiled at you like that. And in that moment, you didn't need him to say anything. The silence between you was full enough. But then gently he did speak. I get that. I think some thoughts don't need color, just wait. You looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, you didn't feel like you needed to nod or perform your agreement. You just let the words settle, let the moment deepen, There's a rare kind of silence that exists between people who are listening to the same internal music. It's not quiet exactly. It's full of shared breath, flickering thoughts, glances that brush like fingers. And in that silence, you walk together as though the ground had adjusted itself just for the two of you. He smiled again a few minutes later. You hadn't said anything at all this time. You'd only paused mid-sentence, realizing what you were about to say was more vulnerable than you intended. He caught it, didn't press, just offered you that same gentle smile again, the one that didn't demand, the one that let you stay exactly where you were without feeling small. And that's when it hit you. He wasn't reacting to your words. He was responding to your pauses. He wasn't just listening to what you said. He was listening to what you hesitated to say. And something about that, something about being seen so quietly, so calmly, without being pulled apart, made you want to stay in this moment longer than you should. You passed a stretch of quiet houses, their windows dim, their porches asleep. The sidewalk was cracked in places, and the scent of wet earth lingered in the air. He spoke about a book he'd once read but forgotten the title of. You told him about a corner in a park you sometimes visit, where everything feels 10 seconds slower than the rest of the world. He said, "That sounds like the kind of place where time listens back." You looked at him again, Dot, and he smiled again, like he knew the exact thought you were thinking. And this time, you smiled back, not with politeness, not with uncertainty, but with full presence, because you weren't trying to charm or be charmed. Weren't performing intimacy, Dot, you were in it. And even though neither of you said it, even though no lines had been drawn or crossed or defined, you both knew this was no longer just a walk. This was no longer just conversation. This was two people orbiting the same stillness and finding in each other the same rare frequency. You realized then that this might not last, that the night would end, that there may never be another, but still, in the sliver of shared breath and quiet smiles, something in you relaxed that had been tense for far too long, Dot, and for now, for this one moment in time, that wasn't asking to be anything else. You let yourself be held by it, Dot, without question, without label, just the simple, startling safety of being known. It wasn't planned, the way your feet slowed as the block opened into a narrow park. Not a grand one, no fountains, no gates. Just a small patch of quiet tucked behind a line of sleeping shops, lit only by an aging street lamp in the dim, muted shine of night. There were a few benches scattered along the brick path, most empty, a few looking too weathered to trust. But one, halfway down, looked like it had waited just long enough. You didn't speak when you paused. You just glanced toward it, and he, without needing words, followed your gaze. "Want to sit?" he asked softly. You nodded, already stepping toward it, Dot. It wasn't that your legs were tired. It wasn't that the walk needed a break. It was that something inside you had reached a stillness and wanted the rest of you to catch up, Dot. The bench creaked gently as you settled beside each other, the wood warm from the day's memory of sun. You didn't sit too close. You didn't sit too far. Your arms didn't touch, but the space between them felt alive, charged, but not anxious. Just aware, Dot. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything, the kind that settles over You like a blanket someone lays across your shoulders without asking first. And you don't mind because it fits. You both leaned back at the same time. Looked up. The sky above was clouded, but not blank. A few stars fought through, flickering like breath held too long. The street lamp buzzed nearby, but you barely noticed it. The world had shrunk. Just a bench. Just a boy. Just a night that had started with a question and now sat heavy with something deeper, quieter, unnamed. I like this, he said, finally. You turned slightly. The bench? He smiled. The pause. You smiled back. You understood what he meant. Sometimes you don't. Know how much you've been running until you stop. And then when you finally sit beside someone who doesn't need you to fill the silence or prove you're worth you, realize how tired your spirit has been. There was a tree beside the bench. Its leaves shifted in the breeze, slow and irregular, like a shy dancer unsure of the rhythm. You watched one leaf detach, spiral slowly down, land without sound on the grass nearby. I used to think moments like this were rare, he said. You looked at him curious, but I think maybe we just rush past them too quickly. Maybe benches like this are always waiting. We just don't slow down long enough to let them feel like ours. The way he said ours made your stomach shift, not with nerves, not with fear, but with something almost too soft to name. Not possessive, not presumptive, just an acknowledgement that for now, in this hour carved out of nowhere, you were sharing something. You didn't speak right away. But when you did, your voice was softer than you remembered it could be. I think we only notice the magic when we're not trying to chase it. He nodded, and for a few moments, that was enough. The breeze picked up. A car passed on a far-off street. Somewhere behind you, a wind chime rang once, then stilled. You glanced at him out of the corner of your eye. The slope of his shoulders, the way he leaned slightly forward as if trying not to take up too much space. The way his hands stayed still, his fingers not twitching for a phone, a distraction, an exit. He wasn't waiting for a moment. He was in it, and so were you. You found yourself telling him something new. Hadn't planned to share, a memory, a regret, a small, quiet ache that still lived just beneath your ribs. You spoke slowly, unsure of why you were offering it, but once the words began, they felt like they belonged here. On this bench, in this air dot, he didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened the same way he always had, with his whole body, with his breath, with that quiet that made your truth feel safe. When you finished, he didn't respond. With sympathy, he responded with his own story, not matching pain, not competition, but companionship. A memory that rhymed with yours, and for the first time in a long time, you felt less alone in something that had lived in you for years. You both leaned back again, the bench groaning softly beneath your weight, like it, too, was holding something. Tender now, you looked at each other briefly, then away. Not out of shyness, out of respect. Some moments need to be looked at sideways, like the moon, like old photographs. Like a truth too beautiful to stare at directly, and then only then did your arms brush, not fully. Just the softest edge of his sleeve against yours. Neither of you moved, because in that small contact, there was no assumption, only presence. The bench beneath you had become more than wood and nails. It had become a room, a chapter, a story inside the story dot, and for the rest of your life, no matter how many benches you sit on, no matter how many cities you walk through, this one would live inside you, not because of what it was, but because of who you were when you sat there, Dot, and who sat beside you. The night had grown stiller, as though even the breeze had paused to listen. You didn't notice at first how quiet it had become around the bench, how even the city's usual background hum seemed to soften. Only the wind moved now, rustling the leaves behind you and brushing strands of your hair gently across your cheek. He shifted slightly beside you, not to move away, but to settle more deeply into the bench, like it was no longer a pause in his walk, but a place, a moment, one worth staying inside Dodd. And then, with that same calm ease that had carried him through the whole walk, he began to speak. I used to go fishing with my grandfather, he said. Didn't respond, not with a question or a prompt. Just let the sentence hang in the air like a pebble dropped into water. And soon the ripples followed, every summer. There was this little lake out behind his house, nothing fancy. Not the kind of place people travel for. It was small, kind of muddy, but to me, it felt like the edge of the world. You looked at him sideways. He wasn't staring at you. He was looking past the trees as if the lake still lived there, just beyond your line of sight. I'd wake up before the sun just to go with him. He had this old tackle box that creaked when it opened, always smelled like metal and river water, and he'd hum never a full song, just these low little sounds like the river itself was talking back. His voice didn't tremble, but it was gentler now, as if pulling the memory forward required care. One morning we didn't catch anything, not even a nibble, and I remember being frustrated, like the whole point had been wasted. I kept asking, why even come if we don't get anything? And he just smiled, said, sometimes the fish don't come because they know you need the quiet more than they do. He looked at you then, not dramatically, not to see if you were impressed, just to check if you'd heard what he'd really said. And you had. Didn't need to ask what the story meant. You didn't need to ask if the grandfather was still alive, or if he'd returned to that lake as an adult. You didn't even need to ask if he still fished Dot, because the story wasn't about fish Dot, it was about the quiet, about what people learn to sit with when there's no obvious reward, about how some moments teach us by giving us nothing except space. You looked at him and nodded, not to answer, but to stay beside him inside the story. I haven't told that to anyone in a long time, he said after a pause, softer than before. Why now? You asked, your voice almost a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He looked up, exhaled slowly, then gave you the kind of half smile that doesn't quite reach the mouth, but is somehow more honest than any grin, because you'd understand. And you did, not just the story, not just the grandfather, but the reason he'd reached for something so quiet, so unrehearsed. He wasn't trying to impress you. He wasn't trying to break the silence. He was trying to share something real, something small and unshiny and true. And that truth, the way it sat gently between you, felt like a gift. You let the silence return for a while after that. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because the story still echoed. In the passive trees in the ground. In you, Dot, it was strange. The feeling that came next, Dot, not desire, not longing. Something more fragile, Dot, trust. The kind of trust that doesn't need a future, Dot, the kind that says, here, I'll show you something I don't let most people see. You don't need to fix it. Just witness it, and you did. The bench creaked. As you shifted, not away from him, but just enough that your knee brushed his. He didn't move. He simply stayed. And in the quiet that followed, you realized something you hadn't expected to feel tonight. Or maybe ever again, Kawan's safety, Dot. Not because the world had changed. Not because he'd promised anything, but because for the first time in a long time, someone had spoken to you with no agenda, no motive, no attempt to turn your attention into approval. He had just shared a story. And in doing so, he had offered himself. You would remember this later, not just the words, but the way the story sat between you. The way it asked nothing and gave everything. And when you'd find yourself on another bench someday, or by a river, or watching a stranger from across a crowded room, you'd remember this story, not for the fish, not for the grandfather, but for the way it made you feel, like someone saw you quietly and stayed. It's strange how quiet can say everything. The bench hasn't moved, and neither have you, not much. You're still sitting side by side, close but not entangled, like two thoughts drifting in the same breath. Around you, the world continues to hush. It's the hour when even the air seems to fold itself gently around the edges of everything, and yet your chest is full, not heavy, not aching, just full. You don't look at him directly, not yet, but you feel him beside you, the soft rhythm of his breath, the gentle awareness that grows in the body when you know someone's presence without needing to check it. And somehow, you both know you don't need to say you're glad you stayed. You don't need to ask what this is. You don't even need to name the thing that's beginning to pulse between your silences. You both feel it, quietly, like the recognition of a song you've only ever heard in dreams. He exhales, and it's not a sigh, not tired, just a slow, deliberate release, as if he's been holding something too delicate to speak. And now it's resting, unnamed, between you. You smile, almost involuntarily, and then he does too. Neither of you look straight on. Not for long. There's something sacred about the space between your glances now. The weight of a look that lingers a second too long would tip the balance, so you look away again. But you feel it, that warmth, that knowing, at some point neither of you note when your knees rest against each other. Not pressing, just aligned, like two puzzle pieces that realize they've always fit. You still don't speak. You don't need to. Words, you realize, would feel clumsy here. Too solid, too sharp. They break the softness like dropping a stone into still water. No, this moment needs to stay fluid. It needs to breathe, so you let it. Let your silence become a language. Let your stillness become a bridge, And every now and then, he shifts just enough for you to feel the warmth of his arm again. And every time, it feels like a question you already know the answer to, yes. That's the answer to all of it, Yes to the pause. Yes to the not knowing. Yes to the night that's slowly unfolding like a story you don't want to end. You remember. Then a moment earlier when he told that story. His grandfather, the lake, the silence full of lessons. You realize that maybe you're living that kind of moment now, not catching anything, just being, just learning, just letting the world shrink into this single, shared breath. He doesn't ask to hold your hand. You don't reach for his, but still, something holds you both. Time passes, but you lose track of it. And in that long pause where no one moves, no. One speaks, and the streetlight hums like a lullaby. You begin to hear the words that aren't said. I see you. I'm glad you stayed. This doesn't have to be anything. More than what it is, but it already matters. You close your eyes for a moment, and you feel him do the same to strangers. Or maybe not strangers anymore. Caught in the soft gravity of a moment neither of you expected, but neither of you wants to leave. There are no declarations. No. I'd never felt this way before. Just presence. Just truth. Just now. And that somehow is more than enough. Asterisk there. Are glances you forget before they end? There are stares that make you want to hide. And then there are the rare, golden ones, the ones that feel less like a gaze and more like an invitation to return to yourself. That's how he looked at you. Now, like you were something he'd always known. Not a mystery to solve, not a prize to chase, but a truth he was finally allowed to see. And in that second, nothing fancy, nothing loud, you felt it. A flicker. Then a flood, like every tiny corner inside. You that had once settled for being misunderstood suddenly turned toward the light. You didn't even realize how many times you'd made yourself smaller until you no longer needed to. How often you'd shrugged off discomfort, laughed when you weren't amused, nodded when you should have walked away. You'd stitched yourself into shapes that didn't fit, called them compromise, and handed your silence over like an offering. Not here. Not now. Not with him. Because in that look, just that look, there was nothing you needed to explain. No pose to strike, no edge to soften. He saw you, not the polished version, not the polite one, the full one. The whole weary, wanting, wonderful you, and something inside you softened so suddenly it almost startled you. You've been carrying armor, not visible, not heavy, but there nonetheless. And with one glance, it fell, not because he demanded it, but because he didn't. The wind moved through the leaves again, rustling softly above your head. A car passed at the edge of the park. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once, then fell quiet, but all you could hear was your own breath. Steady now, and the way his eyes held yours, not gripping, not scanning, just holding. He smiled. And the smile didn't ask for anything. It just rested. Right there on his face, warm and soft, as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. Not yet. It was disarming. How calm it all was. You were used to love as a performance, as a chase, as a proving ground that this was something else entirely. No fireworks. No declarations. Just recognition. And in that recognition, release. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on knees, hands loose between them. His posture was open, casual, but his attention was precise, still on you, still steady, as if you were the only thing this night had ever been about. You found yourself exhaling without realizing you've been holding your breath, and then you laughed, quietly. Unconsciously, he smiled wider at that. What? He asked, head tilted just a little, playful and sincere. I was just thinking, you said, voice barely above a whisper, about how many times I've convinced myself to be okay with less. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to fix it. He just let the truth bloom between you, Dot, and then, so gently you almost didn't hear it, he said, me too. There it was again, that mirror, that strange, beautiful reflection in which you both saw your own story in the other's eyes. You looked away, not out of shame, but to give the moment its space. The bench felt warmer beneath you. Like it, too, had heard the confession and agreed with it. You thought about all the times someone had looked at you with interest that felt like hunger, with affection that felt like a transaction. And then you thought of now, Dot, of him, of this quiet golden thing, how it wasn't loud, but it was true, Dot, how it didn't chase, but stayed. You turned back to him, slowly, let your eyes meet his again, and when you did, you saw it clearly, not just that he saw you, but that he liked what he saw, not for who you might become, Dot, not for what you could offer, but for the you sitting right here, in this hour, in this light, in this truth. You leaned your shoulder toward his, just a little, and he leaned back, not to press, Dot, just to meet you where you were. And in that soft, wordless leaning, something inside you shifted, something that said, this, more of this, only this, and the part of you that used to settle. She didn't speak, Dot, she just quietly left the room. The bench let you go gently, Dot. You stood slowly, as if you were leaving behind more than memory, as if that small, forgotten patch of park had become a pocket universe, one that had briefly bent the rules of time and trust. But even as you stepped off the gravel and back onto the sidewalk, something of it followed you. You didn't speak at first. There was no need. The night stretched out around you like a long breath, and both your footsteps fell into rhythm without discussion. The street was mostly empty now. Not silent, exactly, but stilled. A light breeze slid through the spaces between parked cars. Windows above were dark, save for the soft flicker of a television in one apartment and the glowing blue hush of a fish tank in another, Dot. Everything was quiet, except you. Your thoughts hummed like soft neon, but not the frantic kind. Not the noise that used to fill your head after dates that didn't go anywhere, after conversations that left you lonelier than before. This was something else, Dot. This was quiet, the way a held hand is quiet, the way a shared glance is quiet, the way a feeling, slowly blooming in the chest, doesn't need music to make it move. You looked at him once, Dot, just once, and he looked back at you without flinching, like the air between you had settled into something neither of you wanted to disturb. You passed a small grocery with its metal shutters down. A cat slid through an alley, then vanished. The crosswalk signal blinked even, though no one was watching, Dot, and in all that emptiness you felt, held up not by arms, not by conversation, but by presence. You didn't know where you were going now, not exactly. But it didn't matter. The direction felt secondary. What mattered was that the space between your steps had become a quiet thread. Tying you together, you walked side by side, close enough that your hands could have touched if you wanted. But neither of you reached. There was something too sacred in this not quite touching, something gentle and enormous in the restraint. Still, you weren't alone. You remembered then, without warning, what it had felt like to walk home from other nights, from other people, The ones where you left feeling smaller. The ones where you checked your phone on the way home just to distract yourself from the ache in your chest. The ones that made you doubt whether softness was something you deserved. This was not that dot. This was not doubt. This was a memory you were still writing. Second by second, breath by breath. A moment that wrapped around your shoulders like a jacket someone offers you when you don't ask. But they know. You looked at the sidewalk. Then back at M. Dot, then up at the sky. Dot, no stars tonight. Too much haze. Too much city. But still, the sky felt open. Dot. It felt like permission. You didn't say it out loud, but you knew. The aloneness that had followed you for months wasn't behind you now. It was gone, evaporated, or transformed, or simply seen, and in being seen, released. He glanced over, not to ask anything, just to check, like someone making sure the person beside them is still breathing, still real, and you were more real than you'd felt in months, maybe years. Dot, you stopped at a corner where a streetlight blinked above you, casting soft gold across your skin. You could see the shadows it made on his face, how they curved along. His cheek, dipped beneath his jaw, made his eyes look impossibly deep. You didn't say it, but in that moment, you wanted to. Dot, thank you for this, for being here, for asking the time, for not asking for anything else, for listening, for waiting, for not rushing to define this, for letting the quiet be enough. Dot, instead, you smiled, and that was enough. Dot, he smiled back, and somehow the whole city seemed to sigh. Dot, not from tiredness. Dot, but from relief. Dot, because two people had found each other. Dot, in a city of millions. Dot, on a night of nothing planned, and made something worth remembering. Dot, not by force. Dot, not by fate, just by walking. Dot, and letting the silence speak. Asterisk, you're still walking, slowly now, not because there's anywhere left to go, but because the path itself has become the place you want to be. Every step feels deliberate, unrushed. You're not filling the time, you're living inside it. And beside you, he walks the same way, unhurried, present, a little quieter now, but not distant. Just more tuned in. The silence between you has changed again. It's no longer the quiet of curiosity or pause. It's comfort now. The kind of ease that doesn't need to be named. Like music without melody, only rhythm. Like breathing when you've stopped thinking about how. Dot, and then it happens. Small, unscripted. The sleeve of his jacket brushes your shoulder, just barely. Dot, just enough. You feel it, but more than that, you feel yourself. You feel the part of you that always tensed, always recoiled, always prepared to flinch, stay still. You don't pull away. Not this time. Not because you're being brave, but because finally you don't have to be. His touch wasn't asking for anything. Dot, it didn't linger, didn't press, didn't even apologize. Dot, it simply passed like a thought made physical. Dot, in your body. So used to translating every gesture into a signal of danger or demand, or that did nothing, or maybe not nothing. Dot, it allowed. Dot, it received. And in that tiny allowance, something enormous shifted inside you. You didn't know you needed that moment until it arrived. That one brush of fabric against fabric. The subtle warmth of a body moving near you without urgency, without possession. Dot, it was just contact. But it was everything. Your shoulders remained aligned. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you let them lean again. Not fully, not in a way that said, take me, but in a way that whispered, I trust you won't. He noticed. Of course he did. Not with words, not with motion, but with that quiet change in his breathing. The way it slowed slightly, matched yours again. You had walked through so many nights where touch had meant tension, where closeness had been a trade, where affection felt like a mask someone wore before revealing what they really wanted. But this wasn't that. This wasn't a prelude or a test. It was a moment. Now. And now had become a place where your body could just be. Still. Touch. Safe. He looked at you, not searching, just soft, and you looked back. This time, longer. This time, without fear of being misread, and that glance held everything neither of you had said, that you'd been here before, that always on edge, that you'd wanted this before, that never without cost, that you didn't know what this would become. But for the first time and longer than you could name, you didn't need to know. You just needed to stay in it. The shoulder brush was not a question. It was a permission. And your not flinching was your answer. You passed under another street lamp. And in that pool of pale light, you could see the faintest outline of a smile on his lips. The kind that blooms when something true happens and no one has to point it out. You let yourself smile. And suddenly, the weight you didn't realize you were still carrying began to dissolve. Not all at once, but like sugar in warm tea. Slow. Sweet. Irretrievable once it's gone. You could have stopped right there and called it enough. And maybe you would have on another night. But this wasn't any other night. This was the night. One where you were no longer haunted by what touch used to mean. The one where you remembered how simple closeness could be. And that sometimes a shoulder is all it takes to feel like you're being held. Even if no arms are around you, even if no words are spoken. Just the quiet, just the leaning. Just the choice to stay. And so you walked on. Together. Not clinging. Not claiming. Just side by side. Still touching, still safe, still rewriting what it means to be near someone and not afraid. At some point, the streets stopped feeling like streets. They became corridors, winding paths of warm pavement and cooler patches of shadow. You had passed intersections without noticing, turned corners without choosing, and now the buildings looked unfamiliar but not unkind. They were taller somehow, quieter, like they too were listening. You and he hadn't spoken in a while, but your silence had evolved. It wasn't hesitation now. It was presence. Like you both understood that the city, this very stretch of it, had become something else entirely. A container, a secret, a spell. You walked in rhythm still. But now it wasn't just about pace. It was about echo. When your foot hit the pavement, you could hear his step follow, not chasing, not leading. Just there, perfectly, as though you'd both rehearsed this walk in some other life. You passed a cafe with chairs stacked up like dreams that had already ended. The chalkboard sign had been wiped clean. Even the moon seemed softer in this part of the sky, not casting light so much as breathing it. You looked around and realized something strange. There were no more cars. Not parked, not passing, the city wasn't asleep. It had simply receded, as if the world understood what was happening and decided, kindly, to give you space. You and he had stopped being characters in the usual night. Now, you were the only story being told. You glanced sideways, and this time, he was already looking at you. He didn't smile to impress. He didn't say something clever to fill the moment. He just let the connection stand there, full, warm, unnamed, and you didn't need to smile back to confirm anything, but you did anyway, because something in you had melted into this into the walking, the air, the hour, the you that you were allowed to be beside him. And then he said something not profound, not practiced, just the city looks different at this hour. And it did. Or maybe you realized it just looked different when you weren't navigating it alone. You nodded. It does. Or maybe we're different. He considered that. Maybe both. He said, It was the first real exchange you'd had in a while. And yet it didn't break the magic. It was part of it. A whisper, not an interruption. You passed under a flickering street lamp, and your shadows moved ahead of you, long and interwoven. You watched them curve slightly into each other, not holding hands, but close enough that they could if they wanted. There was a strange kind of honesty in that, in the way your outlines mirrored how you felt, close, nearly touching, but without need, without pressure. He slowed down slightly, not to wait, but to match, as if his body too was learning the language your feet were speaking. And now neither of you were leading. You were just arriving again and again, not to a destination, but to this moment, then the next, and with each step, the city softened further. The traffic lights blinked for no one. Windows high above whispered stories you'd never hear. A bus rumbled by blocks away, but its sound didn't reach you. Even the stray cat on the sidewalk paused for a second, looked up at you both, and then disappeared into the dark, as if to give you privacy. And then you felt it, that old feeling, the one you hadn't even noticed had been with you your whole life, being separate. It was gone, not because you had fallen into someone, but because something larger had fallen into place. You weren't two people meeting anymore. You were a single moment, a quiet line written across the face of the night. No one would remember this walk. No one else would even know it happened. But you would forever. Because this was the hour the city stopped recognizing you as strangers. And for the first time in your life, that didn't scare you. It comforted you, because something in you had changed, not loudly, not visibly. But deeply. Permanently. And it wasn't because he held your hand. He still hadn't, but he didn't need to. He had walked beside you fully, with nothing more than breath and presence and occasional glances that asked, "Are you still here?" And you were, more here than ever. Asterisk. The door clicked closed behind you, soft, almost ceremonial. No lamps were turned on, just the hallway light filtering in, casting pale gold across the floor, your shoes, the edge of the rug that looked like it had stories of its own. You stepped in first. He followed. And something in the air felt reverent. Not sacred in the religious sense, but in the way that museums or quiet forests feel. Like if either of you spoke too loudly, you might shatter. Something delicate. So you didn't You just let the silence carry you in like a gentle tide. You passed framed photos on the wall, people who had nothing to do with this night, a half-drunk glass of water on the counter, a stack of books slightly tilted like they'd been waiting for someone to finish them. You stood in the middle of the room, arms still at your sides. He didn't reach for you, didn't rush, just looked at you in that now familiar way. The one that said, "I'm here." I'm not expecting anything but honesty. You didn't need to ask where you were going. The space answered for you. There was a couch, but it didn't feel right. The night had asked for something softer. So when he took a few steps toward the bedroom, it didn't feel bold. It felt inevitable. You followed, still not speaking. Room was dim. The ceiling fan whispered in slow, sleepy circles. The bedsheets were slightly wrinkled, as if they, too, had been waiting for a story to unfold here. You lay down first, on your back, not quite in the middle, but not curled up against the edge either. Just open. He lay beside you, not too close, not assuming, just there. You turned your head slightly. He turned his. You looked at each other, not with questions, not with need, just with that same soft gaze that had followed you through the city. That knowing, that whisper in the dark that said, "You're not alone anymore." Your head moved toward his chest, slowly, naturally, like a boat drifting to a dock. And when you settled there, when your cheek found the gentle, steady rhythm of his heartbeat, it felt like you had always belonged there. He breathed, you breathed, Dot, and eventually those breaths aligned, Dot, not perfectly, but close enough that it felt like a song. You closed your eyes just for a moment, but the ceiling above you, smooth, shadow-dappled, called you back. And when you looked up again, it wasn't a ceiling anymore. It was a sky, flat white, soft dot, infinite dot. You saw stars that weren't there, not because of light or sleep, but because of something older, Dot, something inside you. You thought about every other ceiling you'd ever stared at alone. The ones you watched when the night had ended too soon, or not gently enough. The ones that made you feel like your body was a room. No, one wanted to stay in. This ceiling wasn't like those, Dot. This ceiling felt like it understood. He shifted slightly, not away. Just closer, Dot, his arm curled around you, not heavy, not claiming, just enough to remind your skin you're allowed to be, wanted gently. You didn't ask what this meant. You didn't ask what tomorrow would bring. You didn't fill the air with words just to hear your own voice, because the truth was already written in the quiet, Dot, in the way your body's rested, Dot, in the way no one rushed to undress what didn't need unwrapping, Dot, in the way this moment felt like its own kind of forever. You watched the ceiling, Dot. It shimmered slightly with the soft rise and fall of the fan's shadow. You imagined each blade a comet, each rotation a slow dance across time, and your body, finally still, finally warm, finally held, became a constellation he hadn't known he was tracing all night. You blinked once, twice, and then let your eyes remain half closed, not from sleep, Dot, not yet, but from trust, Dot, and beside you. His chest rose again, then fell, and in that rhythm, you heard everything, Dot, the city beyond the window, Dot, the question he never asked, Dot, the answer you never said, the breath you'd waited all your life to rest beside. And it wasn't about falling in love, not Exactly, Dot. It was about staying in softness, choosing not to leave, lying there, quietly in the arms of a stranger who was not a stranger. Anymore, Dot, and watching the ceiling like stars, Dot. Now the night is done, not loudly. Not in any grand, crushing way, Dot. It simply folds around you like a blanket that's always known the shape of your shoulders. You lie beside him, breath steady, sailing above you, soft and shadowed like a quiet sky. There are no more questions, no more maps to trace. Just the stillness that lingers when two people have found, for a little while, the right pace, the right silence, the right closeness. Maybe you'll see him again, maybe you won't, but tonight will stay with you, not because of what was said or what was touched, but because of what was allowed to simply exist. A version of you that didn't flinch, that didn't shrink, that didn't rush to apologize for needing something real, Dot. And that version of you, she's still here, Dot, so let sleep take you now. Let the night dim gently around your edges. And as you drift, remember, some of the most beautiful connections don't need to last forever. They just need to be real and kind and true for one perfect night. He only asked for the time, and somehow you gave him the rest of your night. And maybe quietly a little piece of your heart too. Sleep well.